Joanne Corley, and I've been an employee, a training and development specialist for a number of years, and I've traveled throughout North America conducting public seminars, on-site seminars, and coaching. And I wanted to put together an informational video not only for my clients but also for those who are decision makers, because I know in these economic times, spending money on training, every dollar you spend, I know you want to spend really well. And so I want to just share some information and some insights to help you do that in a more informed and effective way. The name of this video is The Fundamentals of Learning, What Every Decision Maker Must Know to Make the Most of Their Training Dollars. You know, I think a lot of companies function under an old model of decision making, and you may have run across this, you may have grown past this, but I have found this to be fairly popular today in this training environment. The first thing is people think one training will fix everything. And they may not say that consciously, but sometimes that's how decisions are made. One training will fix everything. I've got a challenging employee, send them to a seminar. Then the assumption is that the behavior will actually change. The next part of the old model decision making is a couple of trainings a year is enough. For example, if a company wants to develop their managers or their leaders, a couple of webinars, seminars, e-learning will do the trick. And so that's part of the old model of decision making as well. And then another one is just because they hear it means I will get the results I'm looking for. Just because they hear it doesn't mean they're learning it or want to do anything with it. So these are things that I think are somewhat prevalent, and although they may not be on a conscious level, the way the decisions are made reflect this sort of underlying thinking. In reality, in order for every training dollar to be spent effectively, there needs to be these components: consistency, continuity, and it needs to be tied to a performance plan of some kind, and hopefully to the business strategy. So, what needs to be in place for the optimal learning conditions to occur? And here's really what they are. It goes like this. First of all, an employee who's learning has to consciously be saying, yes, you know what, I basically understand that. I get it on some level. In order for them to get it on some level, they have to have a relevant context by which to apply the information to. It's something in their real life. So here's an example. I have a significant other that's involved in an industry that I have no experience with. And so when he's explaining things about how to build a tower or, LEED or, those kinds of tax credits for old buildings, I don't know what the heck he's talking about. In fact, we've used that phrase. It's Greek to me. Same thing with me. If I say I'm going to an ASTD meeting or SHRM, he's like, what does that mean? In fact, people have to have some sort of context by which to apply the information so it sticks. I call it the fly paper and fly. The fly paper is context, the fly is the information, so that it sticks. They got to say, I can relate. The next is they've got to really want to learn. They have to really want to use the information and to use it now. I'm sure you've heard the old adage, if you don't use it, you'll lose it. So there's got to be an internal motivation and desire. We call it the WIIFM. What's in it for me? That has to be one of the conditions that's present for optimal learning. And finally, the person has to say, you know what, I will work diligently to implement what I'm learning until I actually see a desired outcome. In fact, I will work through any resistance until I get the desired results. Here's what's interesting in learning. When people are experiencing new information, sometimes they experience both external resistance and internal resistance. The external resistance might be environmental, for example. I've had folks in my seminars who, classic example, topic, how to deal with unacceptable employee behavior. I give tips on how to coach an employee, and the person in my seminar says, well, I'm not sure if my direct report will approve of that or if they'll get that. Well, that's external resistance to the application of the information. On the internal side, what a lot of people don't realize is that on some level, some new learnings are actually resisted by the learner on a subconscious level. Let's say there's a new behavior related to leadership or management, and their subconscious might be fighting the application of that new information. So the learner has to be, number one, aware, but also willing to push through those external and internal resistors in order to fully integrate what's being learned. So in reality, then, all learning and training is self-directed because the learner definitely has to be in a position where they want to consciously practice what they're learning, that there's a plan to implement it, and that it's embedded in their everyday work experience. One of the least utilized and most effective context for learning and training is the actual real life experience. And guess what? That's free. The next thing that needs to be in place is that the learner has to revisit and repeat consistently what they're learning. In fact, they've got to be able to do so in a way that they're getting new lessons out of it. They're getting new awarenesses and a deeper understanding, and that's all part of the integration and the application process. And then finally, the result of that will be going from conscious competence to unconscious competence. Another way of putting it is the new behavior is so automatic, I don't even have to think about it anymore. We call that a habit or a skill. I ask this question in a lot of my seminars. How many of you have ever driven home from work and wondered how you got there? A lot of people raise their hand. And I say, well, who drove you? Besides, five angels. And part of that is, the fact that they're so conscious at doing what they're doing so well that they've got back and forth to work without thinking about it. So what can we conclude? Well, just because someone has heard something doesn't mean that they'll remember it or that they'll even want to. We can't assume that learners have a relevant context in which to apply information. And in fact, that just because they hear it means it makes sense to them. And then we also can't assume that they will take it to heart or that they're even willing to integrate it into their own lives. Also, we don't want to assume that there will be absolutely no resistance to the integration of what they'll learn. So these are things that are sometimes assumed in training, but we got to be aware of that as we're making decisions. So here's some questions you want to ask yourself. First, you want to ask yourself, when I make a decision on a training, do I expect behavior change? Do I expect a cultural change within my organization? Delivery of information for the sake of knowing? Or is it a feel-good experience? All those things are relevant. You have to decide, though, what training am I deciding on and what's really the outcomes that I want to get. Secondly, you want to ask yourself, what do I want to put in place, or my company, direct reports, managers, whoever, what do I want to put in place to support the application? Because if you don't have that in place, you will not be able to maximize the learning experience. So at its core, you're asking yourself two things. Is this just about sharing information, or is this about actually delivering a skill? Skill development is not a one-time event. Here's my belief. Most of the money wasted in corporate training is wasted on the soft skill side, where it's not proprietary information, but we're wanting to learn all these behavioral skills and competencies to work better in the marketplace, work better with each other, to manage our time, to be a more effective coach and leader, to collaborate better with colleagues, to get along, those kinds of things. All of those behaviors do need support in getting implemented, and there's got to be those optimal learning conditions in place. I hope that's been helpful. I invite you to contact me if you have any other questions. You see my email address there. If you want a free consultation, I'm happy to go over your learning strategy with you and see, do you have any blended learning strategies in place that you could work with? There's a lot of different things you can do to deliver information, particularly if you're just trying to push out knowledge, that are much more cost effective than an all-day workshop or training. Webinars, of course, e-learning, but also too mobile apps. I just rolled out a mobile app as part of my training offerings, and you're welcome to sample that. It's a free app, and the name of it is the 1% Edge Portable Coach. You can go right, it's available on all smartphone platforms, so you're welcome to use that as well. It is an emerging trend, and it's a very cost-effective way of sharing information and in having learning embedded in your everyday work experience as well. All right, I hope that's been helpful. Stay connected, and if I can help you in any way, let me know.